Welcome to E3, Engage and Empower with Empathy, a podcast brought to you by the Empathy Collective, a consulting firm that helps business leaders inspire change, one conversation at a time. We are building a community of like-minded leaders and experts who all share the same passion, taking care of people at work. Whether you are a blue-collar worker or white-collar worker, small business owner or corporate executive, you belong in this community. Modern society promotes a new level of hustle and wellness culture that is leaving people stressed and burned out. We see this in the workplace with the historically low employee engagement numbers published by Gallup, but it expands beyond the walls of our work environments into our family life. My guest today, Dr. Paula Freedman-Diamond, is a psychologist specialized in helping people with anxiety, perfectionism, and disordered eating. We will talk about her personal struggles that led to her desire to help others and share practical tips for overcoming burnout and gaining control of your life. This is E3, Engage and Empower with Empathy. Welcome to the show, Paula. It's really nice to have you here. I've been looking forward to this dialogue, mainly because my sister is a mental health counselor and she specializes in a similar area. And she said, "Hey, I have this really, really cool book that I'd love for you to read. I think based on the interviews you've been having on your podcast, you would really enjoy this book." So I picked it up, Toxic Striving. For those of you watching, here it is. And there was so much that resonated with me personally. I know you're a millennial. I'm a millennial. There's a lot I could relate to in what you were saying when you're talking about personal stories. But then I was also just seeing some of this reflected in the behavior around me and in what I've seen in the workplace and the way people cause unnecessary stress to themselves. So I really felt like it was a relatable book with a lot of practical journaling exercises that I think could be helpful. So anyway.
Thank you. That means everything to me. This book, I poured my whole heart and soul into it. So when it resonates with people, it just lights me up. And that's that's what it's for. And that's my goal. And I have a lot of, my own stuff wrapped up in it of kind of takes one to know one when it comes with this personality and this person who really struggles with toxic striving. So there's sort of like a kindred spirits when I meet someone else who too is like, this spoke to me. I'm like, I get it. I get it.
Yeah, I think this is going to speak to a lot of people listening to this. And I feel like most people I've spoken to who've written books and I've interviewed them, it always comes from a personal place where they've experienced this themselves or they've seen it so much in their surroundings that they felt compelled to put pen to paper. So I'm just curious. I just mentioned I'm seeing a lot of hustle and wellness culture currently, but I've also seen it in the 90s when I was growing up as a child. I mean, it's just basically been a continuous part of American culture. You mentioned in your book that there seems to be a specific personality type that gets drawn into this hustle culture more than others. What is that typical profile?
Yeah. So it's interesting because most people have heard of like nature and nurture, right? We have these two forces that sort of shape maybe how we turn out as people. And the nurture part is a lot of like the cultural piece of this, pressure to hustle and achieve and all of that. But then there's a nature component that I noticed because it's like I know other people, other millennials like me and you who grew up in the 90s surrounded by these same messages who didn't turn out with as much internal pressure and suffering and anxiety as a result. So what I found in my practice, as I've been a clinical psychologist for over a decade now, and in my practice, I have found that there are a lot of common factors in certain personality styles. Someone who maybe has like a stronger desire for control, likes to, have plans and structure or gets really focused on details. Most people have heard of like the big five personality traits. So you could have like trait neuroticism or conscientiousness, where maybe you just have kind of a natural tendency to order or to need to get things right or to kind of struggle with mistakes or things like that. And I argue that none of that is a negative thing. Our society kind of rewards the opposite a lot of times, but any trait or tendency, it really is context dependent whether that trait or tendency can be a strength or a limitation. And I would argue that in certain situations, being really conscientious or having this tendency to like plans or like control or want to achieve, or being highly sensitive. That's another thing I should mention. Some people just sort of experience their emotions as really strong set of sensations in their body, or they get really prone to maybe like ruminative thought or, fixating on things. And we all process information a little bit differently. And some people just have those tendencies, and how they process information is, they might feel their emotions really as really, really strong in the body. All of that's to say, like, that's not inherently bad or wrong. Some people are just like that. I'm like that, and I've gotten the message a lot of times that that is wrong. Don't be so sensitive. Don't be so dramatic. You're overreacting, things like that. I've discovered as an adult and through my own healing process and therapy and in various forms of self-development, that being sensitive serves me really well in a lot of situations. It makes me highly empathetic. It makes me, pretty good psychologist and able to take the perspective of people who are very different from me. And that's really valuable, but that's not always valued by the dominant culture. So that's what I mean when I talk about maybe a certain personality who's kind of predisposed to being really highly influenced by the messages that you're supposed to strive, you're supposed to achieve, you're supposed to kind of like program yourself like a machine to optimize every moment and be super productive and super in control and disciplined, things like that.
I found it interesting that you said how you noticed growing up that some people didn't react to the messages or the environment in the way that maybe you have reacted to it. I was thinking about my personal experience growing up in the 90s, and maybe you can relate to some of this too. I remember subscribing to 17 magazine before I was 17. I was like 13 or 14. And of course, you're like flipping through all the ads and looking at all the models. And I mean, back in the 90s, fad dieting was a big thing. I mean, there was always some sort of diet happening, a special diet, the Atkins diet or whatever. I think that was a time when Oprah lost a lot of weight. And so she was dieting. I mean, literally everyone was dieting in the 90s. That's what it felt like. But I definitely noticed that, yeah, some of my friends in high school did not seem to be bothered by that, or at least didn't succumb to this, I have to be thin. I have to look a certain way. I mean, yes, this definitely impacts young teenage girls more than others. When I think about this now, it's appalling. But I remember I had this like banner and it said, "Nothing tastes as good as being thin feels."
Gosh.
And I taped it literally across from my bed. So it was like on the wall above like all these pictures of like women I aspired to look like. So like I had ripped out magazine pages of like female athletes and things, because I played a lot of sports in high school. So it was like, professional volleyball players and swimmers. So I literally had this shrine
Oh my gosh.
of, women. And then this thing, why did my parents say anything? Like, this is horrible.
Yeah.
But as I was thinking about this conversation, I was like, I got to mention this example because my teenage years were basically spent toxically striving to be thin. And it led to a lot of disordered eating, especially in my early teenage years, which led to deterioration of my muscles and my health. And it affected my performance in volleyball and swimming and things. I remember observing some of my friends who weren't affected by that at all. They were fine, moving on with their lives. No one had posters in their rooms about, being thin. I'd love to hear your personal experience growing up in the 90s, because it sounded like you had I want to say a similar experience, but you were equally impacted by this environment of, toxic striving for thinness or perfection or whatever that we were experiencing as young teenagers during that time. What was your experience?
Mm-hmm. Very much so. I'm like nodding along as you're sharing all of this. I'm like, oh my gosh, I also had 17 magazine before I was 17. And I thought I was so cool for consuming
Yeah,
that kind of stuff, at
me
12
too.
13, like, wow, look at me. I'm an adult or something. I also kind of came of age when everyone was on Weight Watchers and counting their points and, doing all of those things. And I remember, and it's funny looking back because of course it never occurred to me that it was something to think critically about at the time. But I remember when fat was bad and everyone was doing low fat everything. And, my mom would make dinner for the family. For the rest of us, she would maybe cook something in oil, and then she would have her own separate, like a piece of fish that she made with like the Pam cooking spray. And
Oh, God, I love Pam.
yeah, I remember thinking it didn't seem strange to me. It almost just got internalized as like, okay, so when I'm an adult, I guess I'll have to make mine with Pam, like it was like, apparently it's okay for me right now to eat this type of stuff, but there's going to come a time where I will have to make this change. And that's just what adults do or women do or whatever. Like it wasn't really like this, conscious thing until I'm looking back. But I remember when it shifted to like carbs are bad. And now everyone's on the high protein, Atkins, whatever kind of stuff. And it also never occurred to me that that was something to question. Like, all right, I guess now we're just all doing this. So there was a lot of following the crowd, but I was always trying to do what was right, quote unquote, in terms of how to eat or physical activity. Eventually, as a teenager, I also got into counting and tracking and recording everything I ate, and then, writing down how many calories were in it and doing all this stuff that really was quite disordered. But it didn't seem disordered because nobody told me it was.
Yeah.
There was no, concern. I remember in college, not going to certain like social things so that I could go work out, and people praised me like, wow, you're so disciplined. I should be working out today too. It was never like, you're missing out on life. So yeah, there was a lot of social reinforcement for it, or even people, admiring or wanting to be that way, wanting to be that disciplined. I found that it kind of seeped into every aspect of my life. And it didn't start off with food for me. It started off with just general people pleasing and wanting to be good and never have anyone worry about me, never get in trouble, never act out. My favorite compliment was, Paula's such an easy child, I never have to worry about her. It always made me feel really like, wow, I'm doing something right, but then of course, eventually you do have needs. Everyone has needs. And someone who is quiet and well behaved and goes with the flow and, seems to not really struggle, eventually needs something, attention or care or validation or whatever. And so I would just sort of like, I don't know, kind of look for ways to get that need met, but without actually asking for it. And I think that's where it kind of got channeled into the disordered eating. It was like I turned to food as a way to control and as a way to maybe quietly ask for someone to care about me. And people did care about me, but I had formed this belief that they would only care about me if I was easy and if I did what they wanted all the time and if I was very compliant and accommodating. It was a lot to unpack, but that's also who I primarily have treated in my clinical practice, are people who also maybe struggle with some of those beliefs where it's hard to tolerate the discomfort that comes with someone being mad at you or not just doing what you think people want you to do all the time.
I find that interesting because when you spend that much time really striving for something, or it becomes ingrained in your DNA, right? And then you come into adulthood and you're trying to unravel all of those beliefs. That seems like a daunting task to me. For me personally, the disordered eating, it kind of naturally dissolved when I studied abroad in Europe, my junior year of college, because the society there was not centered around exercise and food. It was centered around enjoying life. So my focus turned away from food and, staying fit. In fact, when I remember going out and going for a jog, and this was 2004, 2005, going for a jog through the streets of France, in the town I was studying in, and I would get stares because people would, if you exercise, you go in a private place, like you go to a park or something, like you don't just run out. And it's different now. I think it's changed in France now, but at the time it was like, why are you running on the sidewalk? Mm-hmm. There was more balance there. When I came back into American culture after that year, I realized how obsessed we are culturally with food. You watch the TV in France and the ads are a nice combination of, banking or buy a car or whatever. You turn on the TV in the US, and literally every other ad is like a huge pizza or a taco or, some
Yeah.
food, right? It's just food. So that's kind of what that helped me dissolve that belief system of I need to constantly work towards thinness or whatever. But not everyone has that luxury of just planting themselves in another culture where they can just naturally unlearn those behaviors. And I found it interesting in your book, and just going to flip to this. So it's page 27. You have this nice exercise on the cost of compliance. When I was going through this exercise, it was fascinating to me because you don't realize how much we tell ourselves, I should be doing this. I am bad if I do this. So the negative self-talk, that's the internal dialogue, impacts us even more than maybe our external environment would. So could you talk a little bit about this exercise and how you take your clients through exercises like this to help unravel something that's so embedded in their DNA from childhood?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of my favorite activities too. So I'm glad you flagged it. I talk about it a lot. Well, first of all, I do want to mention there are some, systemic factors that do make it easier for some people than others to maybe go abroad like you did and have this realization and then be healed. And I imagine it was more of a journey than that, but
Yes.
to have that first seed planted and then be able to come back and just decide to stop engaging in those behaviors, because we do live in a society that is not kind to people in larger bodies, and that makes it not easy. So someone who maybe is naturally in a body that faces discrimination, it's a lot harder sometimes to just be, not just, but to go through this process. And so that's a piece of it too, is to like think about, yes, the cost of what has it cost me, but also recognize and validate that it might not be easy to let go of these beliefs. In some ways you might experience pain that you didn't have before, and emotional pain at not trying to maybe fit in or trying to do the thing that society told you to do. So I want to name that too before we get into it. But essentially what you're doing is you're thinking of a belief or a rule that you have. I should be this way. I have to do this. The example I use in the book was about what your skin should look like, because that's a journey I've been on. I'm supposed to have clear complexion and acne's bad and you shouldn't have pimples and all of that. And not that was this like explicit thing going through my head all the time, but it was this idea that I internalized from society, that you need to be beautiful and being beautiful means having clear skin. And so I had a long journey that I'd be lying if I said it was totally over, where, I would try medications and products and facials and all kinds of things. I was thinking about it a lot, always putting energy into how am I going to get clear skin. And I did all kinds of crazy things to try, and it never fully worked. But when you stop and you think about it, it's like, well, what have I spent on this? What has been the cost of me trying to comply with this idea or this belief? And you can tally it up in a way, how much money do I think or can I estimate that I've spent on different products or fixes or coaching or, whatever it might be? How much time have I spent over the course of my life? How much energy, how much mental strife has it caused? How much of my mental space has gone to it and maybe taken me away from other things? And what kinds of things has it taken me away from? So when you think about it like that, you might go through all of those questions and tally it all up and decide, you know what, it's worth it. All the things that I've done to try to get clear skin or to be in a thin body or to get to a certain income level or whatever, all of that is worth it, and I'm going to keep doing it. And that's fine. Only you can decide if that's true or not. But a lot of times when people are honest with themselves and they really get into the nitty gritty, they realize like, wow, I've put a lot into this thing that when I zoom out and I think about my life as a whole and the things that matter to me, the amount I've put into this thing and this pursuit is disproportional to how much it actually matters to me in terms of like a meaningful life. So has my focus on like the skincare stuff, the amount I'm putting into it, does that match up with how important it is to me to look a certain way? And has it taken me away from other stuff that matters? Family, friends, being present in social situations, going to things, not avoiding things out of shame or fear of judgment, but going and showing up in my life because I want to be at certain events or activities, not hiding, pursuing hobbies or reading books for pleasure at night instead of reading like skincare blogs. When you think about all of the ways that you have maybe made space for this pursuit in your life, and if you had that energy freed, if like someone could wave a magic wand and all of a sudden this thing is not important, or it's fixed, whatever that means for you, what would you be focusing on? I think asking yourself that question can be really empowering, and it can really highlight what you truly care about, and kind of contrast that with what you were taught to care about, because those are not always the same thing.
I think that's a really good place to start, just reflecting on how much time you're spending on this obsession. If I look back to the time I spent as a teenager focusing on having the right body, I mean, it was a lot of time, and in a lot of cases, I was avoiding social situations. I was obsessing over eating and preparing food and things. So when you actually do the mental math and do the calculation, it's like, wow, I'm missing out on certain aspects of life. Do you have a specific example of a client you've worked with? And it doesn't necessarily have to be a disordered eating. Maybe it's, in your case, the obsession with skin perfection. Someone who's basically spending a lot of mental energy on this particular type of striving. Once they make that realization, how do you then move them to the next step where it becomes, that gradual unraveling process, right, of habits that have been habits for a long time?
Right. I think, you can go about it in a variety of ways. And it's so interesting. I love to see what people's entry point is into that process, because it is so different for everyone. For some people, it's their relationship with food. For other people, it's their relationship with work. It can show up in so many different ways. And so to think about, what's one source of suffering for you. And I work with a lot of people. I imagine people like your audience who are high achievers working in the corporate world, or working in a career where there's a lot of pressure to achieve and to always be productive and always be doing, always be trying to better yourself or optimize or make the process more efficient or whatever it might be. And so a lot of times that's where we find our entry point is, how much energy are you putting toward never making a mistake at work, or being super eloquent and polished in your presentation, and often the effort and the outcome are not related in the way that you think they're going to be too. A lot of times we have this idea of like, if I spend more time thinking about this thing and more energy preparing, and that's not to say preparing isn't helpful, but like, to the degree that we sometimes believe we have to in order to do a decent job at it, it can kind of backfire, right? Because then you're consumed and you're obsessive. So I've had clients who check their email compulsively, or who will go back and reread emails before they send them over and over to make sure, does that sound exactly right? I'm so curious. This is kind of a tangent, but now it just popped in my head, like how it's going to be now that AI is such a tool that people lean on for things like writing emails or crafting presentations, how that's going to affect this psychological process for people. My instinct is that it might have some harmful effects, but you never know. Could also be like, oh, all right, AI told me this, so I'm going to just, leave it be. But anyway, yeah. So I've worked with people who have that tendency to kind of play back over things that they've said, or emails that they've written, or play back over it before going into a situation. They kind of rehearse to the nth degree. And what I find helpful is to work on the emotional piece. When you don't refresh your inbox, or when you don't reread the email, like what comes up in your body? Usually it's a set of sensations that they find uncomfortable, right? It's like, oh, I feel overwhelmed, or I feel helpless, or I feel out of control, or I feel scared, right? A lot of fear. That there's all behavior has a purpose, or else you wouldn't be doing it. So usually there's a reason someone developed these strategies of going back over things over and over, or feeling like they need to optimize and control. So we'll get into what comes up for you when you try to not go with the urge to check or to do this thing. And then how do we build some tolerance for that discomfort? Because emotions are always coming and going and changing moment to moment. and you don't have to do anything with them. They just peak and subside naturally on their own. But when they come up and they're really uncomfortable and overwhelming, we feel like we have to do something. I have to get rid of this feeling. And there's like a soothing almost that can come. When I felt the discomfort over, like, I've got a new breakout on my face, my way of seeking soothing was to go down those internet rabbit holes looking for treatments and all of that, because it makes you feel like you're doing something about the feeling. But really, if I could sit with that same discomfort of, oh my gosh, I'm self-conscious, or I'm feeling shame or embarrassed or whatever it might be, which by the way also comes with expanding your emotional vocabulary and being able to identify what's going on in yourself, then you can build some tolerance, build the ability to sit with that feeling. Maybe you might have to distract yourself from it or find ways to kind of move through it and ride the wave. Then you're not controlled by it anymore. I say all the time, what you resist persists. And that's a really common saying. People who use ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, which is one of the theories that I use in the book, the more you try to not feel a certain emotion, or the more you try to control something, the more that thing ends up kind of controlling you. So if you can sort of make some space for it, I don't like feeling self-conscious, but I can handle this set of emotions. It's not my favorite thing, but it's temporary. Then you have freedom, right? Because then you don't have to go into all of these different things you're going into to try to get rid of or fix or control or look for solutions. You can make a choice in how you spend your energy or your time. So it kind of opens you up a little bit. And I think once people see that, once people live that a little bit through actually doing this process, it starts to click, and you start to buy in a little bit more that like, maybe it's okay if I don't keep operating this way.
I love that concept, and it seems not only liberating, but obviously the topic of this podcast is empathy. Empathy for others is the first thing we think of, but really empathy for self is what you're talking about here, is just kind of sitting with your own emotions and empathizing with them and saying, it's okay to feel this, but I also don't have to latch onto it and quickly move into problem solving mode.
Exactly. And I think you bring up a good point too about that. When we think of empathy, we think about it related to others. And so often the people who are so deeply empathetic towards others and so able to really, validate someone else's pain or struggles are so harsh to ourselves. Those are the oftentimes most self-critical people. And what I find, and this has been so interesting in my personal life and in my work, is that when you learn to apply that empathy and that compassion to yourself, it actually deepens your connections with people. Because if you think about it, it's like, if I'm coming from the mindset of, it's okay for you to take a break or to take a rest or to need support when you're struggling, but it's not okay for me to. There's almost this power differential in your mind where it's like, I don't need the same things other people need. Maybe I'm better, or I'm worse, I'm less deserving or whatever. And when you're in either a one up or a one down position, you can't really connect, you have to really be in a place of shared humanity and, be in a place of like, we both experience pain, we both have needs, we both have struggles to truly connect with another person. So I think that's also a cool side effect of this kind of healing process, is the ability to then have deeper, more meaningful relationships with the people in your life. You're not always having to be in this role where you feel comfortable as the supporter or as the person helping. You can have it be more mutual and reciprocal. And a lot of times I find when I'm talking to someone who's sort of not really bought into that yet, they're like, I only feel comfortable when I'm helping others. We'll think about like, how do you feel when you're able to help someone that you care about? And it's like, well, it feels really fulfilling and I enjoy it. And it's like, well, so why would you deprive other people, the people you care about, of getting to experience that fulfillment that comes with helping you and supporting you? Like it goes both ways, that it feels meaningful to help others and to support others that we care about, or that, to help others in the world, and others might feel that way about us. It's not such a wild idea.
I love the way you put that. And it makes me think a lot about conversations I've had recently in some of my workshops where we guide people through change and having those difficult conversations. A lot of senior leaders feel like they can't be vulnerable or show that self-empathy in front of their team members. But in fact, what we're finding is that the team members crave that. They want to know that their leader is experiencing tough emotions, especially during times of change. And they're also able to then role model the behavior that they want to see in their team.
Mm-hmm.
So, just like you said, if you are supporting others, your team members, for example, but you're not supporting yourself, how does that look to your team? It's like, oh, they're working overtime all the time. They're telling me, oh, please take your vacations. Please, log off at 5 o'clock. But then your boss is online until 10 o'clock at night every day and taking phone calls on the weekends. It creates this disconnect, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was interesting how you mentioned being okay with taking care of yourself and also demonstrating that to others, that it goes both ways. You want to support others, but then also you're taking care of yourself.
Yeah, I think that makes so much sense. Would someone believe you, that you mean what you say if you're not really living it, you're not really demonstrating that? Is it really okay to log off at 5 o'clock if the person in charge never does? They say it, do they mean it? Because they're not doing it themselves. So how can you trust even that that's truly acceptable,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has certainly been a really great start to my day, just talking through this. Thank you for the healing too, just being able to talk about my time as a teenager. I don't think I've talked about that being thin poster in my bedroom in decades, apart from having the talk with my sister about it. So thank you for providing an environment to have an open discussion about stuff like this, because I think a lot of people struggle with these things and we just don't feel comfortable talking about it.
Or I wonder if a lot of times it feels it's so normalized that you don't realize you're thinking about it and you're really paying attention to how it feels in your body. You don't realize how much suffering it's caused and how painful it has been. It's just like, well, it's just what people do. I'm glad to open up more spaces where people can be honest with themselves and each other about what has happened or how it's affected you, to have absorbed these messages and to not have anyone say like, hey, you don't have to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate you taking the time today and also for the great work that you're doing to help people unravel these traumas that we're causing ourselves with our daily toxic striving. So thank you for making such a positive impact on people, Paula.
Yeah, thank you. And I see you doing similar work from a different angle, in the corporate world and in spaces that are just sort of traditionally so toxic and send this message of pressure to perform and optimize and kind of deny having needs and make yourself into like a worker bee machine. So I appreciate that you're chipping away at that as well. So, and thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. It was certainly a pleasure to have you today. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts. And if you would like to learn more about the Empathy Collective, check out our website, theempathycollective.com. Life is too short. Let's take care of each other at work so that together we can make this world a better place.